We're going through genocide and we're still paying taxes.
In class, they literally would just stare at me. They've never seen someone colored before.
I'm from Colombia. Immediately, I'm associated with cocaine.
As soon as I walk at the door, they think I'm from China.
If you could pass for white, you just passed for white.
Here in episode 3 of Through the Looking Glass, Race in Canada, the conclusion of our 3-part series, we hear from all of our groups about what it's like for them to live as Canadians based on the color of their skin, their personal testimonies. In those, we reveal stark differences, but also shared experiences and aspirations. There has never been a more important time than right now to give back to communities across this country. Inside our presenting sponsor Telus' world-leading networks is a network of good. Telus is bridging digital divides so that all Canadians are connected to the technology and resources they need to live their lives. They help low-income families get online. Their mobile health clinics bring healthcare to the homeless. Telus gives back to over 4,000 community organizations every year, and they volunteer over 1 million hours a year for those in need. Telus has committed more than $150 million to support COVID-19 relief and have given more than $1.3 billion since the year 2000 to support thousands of charities. Telus is using its resources, technology, and people to ensure we're all connected for good. To learn more, visit telus.com/givesback. Can I ask you a sensitive question? And I understand it to be a sensitive question. In this country where you live, what is a conclusion that people who don't know you draw about you based on the color of your skin? You're smiling, Sherwayne. That wasn't the reaction I expected.
Well, for me, I can use a past example from a workplace. I was people would tell me that I don't come across as the typical, because I'm Jamaican, I don't come across as a typical Jamaican because Jamaicans are normally loud and lazy, etc. So, it's like that's the stereotype attached to my country. So, if I quote unquote behave different, then, I'm considered to not be the norm. So.
Interesting. Anybody else?
Since I grew up in Kitchener-Waterloo, I was one of the only brown families in the whole school, and they thought I was the dirty, stinky Indian packy girl. And then I moved even more out west into a small town called Wellesley, and they had Mennonites, and the little Mennonite girls and boys would just stare at me. In class, they literally would just stare at me like they've never seen someone colored before. So what did they have to say about it? Of course, I was different, but I know before I was the dirty, stinky packy to that. And now moving to Toronto, where everyone's so multicultural, if anything, I was just another brown girl.
Okay. So Toronto's like a cool place to be a person of color? No impediments to life if you're a person of color in Toronto?
I wouldn't say that. Okay, come at me.
So I'm from Scarborough, and Scarborough has a bad rep. And I think that once people hear that I'm from Scarborough and I'm a black man, that I'm assumed to be uneducated, uncouth, have no tact, I'm a gangster, I have a gun. If I drive a car, I must be a drug dealer. These are just some of, and we've had, I just want to say in Toronto, in Toronto politics, we've had politicians of color say that black men who drive cars should be pulled over by the police. So it's not hunky-dory to be black in Toronto. But do I think it's better to be black in Toronto than it is in other remote places in Canada? Yeah, it is.
Well, let's ask Perry about that. Out in Dartmouth, what's a conclusion that people will reach about you?
I have kind of two. There's I'm either perceived as a threat, or they want to put me in my place. But the cops, it's like, yo, what are you doing? Where are you from? Constantly pulled over because it's a black guy in a car. and they don't know that car. That's not familiar, so they want to run the plates, run my name, and then just give me a hard time. And that's happened multiple times. I've lived here all my life, but they focus on the black neighborhoods where I'm from, and there's constantly cops driving through the neighborhood, and they're over policing our areas. But we have things like that going around on like this all the time. But it's not a good feel. But it's those things I feel we got to try to fix.
What is a conclusion that people who don't know you come to about you based exclusively on your ethnicity?
Taxes.
Taxes? What about taxes?
Yeah. A lot of people think that we don't contribute to taxes in this country. Just because we have a treaty card, a piece of plastic, we're not automatically king of taxes or queen of taxes. We are just exactly like them. We have to work for our stuff too. And it's not just handed to us. We work hard. We're hard workers.
Yeah, thank you, Thunderbird. That has been a big conversation topic for me recently with my father. Actually, he's under this impression that there is just this welfare handout to all First Nations across Canada, and he puts everyone in the same basket and thinks that everyone just gets payouts nonstop. I guess for me, the one that I would always get is not necessarily negative, but every time I'm outside, people assume I know what every plant is and what it can do.
We're going through genocide and we're still paying taxes. How about that? Is that enough yet?
Okay. You know, I talked to one of Canada's greatest musicians, a guy named Robbie Robertson, who was the lead member of a group called The Band, which played with Bob Dylan and were very, very influential in the 60s and 70s. He's from Six Nation Reserve outside of Toronto. He told me that when he was a little boy, his mother said to him, "Be proud of being an Indian, but be careful who you tell." Does that resonate with you at all?
It does with me, for sure. I'm light-skinned, even though I have dark hair, I kind of look, a lot of people really don't know what I am, except for Indigenous people. They know that I am, Indigenous, right? And so I had a lot of white friends even in elementary school. And, I told my best friend in elementary school, everybody used the slang, right? I told her, I'm Indian and I'm proud of it. And, I must have been 7, 8, didn't know any better. And after that, she was not my friend. I couldn't understand why. She wouldn't even acknowledge me or anything like that. And, that's one of the, me being older, I took a lot of abuse in school from getting beat up and stuff like that.
Because of that?
Being Indigenous, yes.
Desiree, does any of this ring true with you?
No, because I don't look like, I look just white. And so I haven't experienced any of that personally, but I've watched my mother experience it, my aunts. And my grandmother just told us that she was just white, but she hid it because it was so bad in the Saskatchewan area in the 1920s that if you could pass for white, you just passed for white. And so that's what she did.
Right. That makes you emotional to tell that story.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Who else would like to jump in? What's a conclusion or an assumption that people make about you based exclusively on your ethnicity or skin color?
So every time for me, I'd say like, oh, like my background, like I'm from Colombia or whatnot, like immediately like I'm associated with like cocaine. Immediate.
I heard that one.
Always like, oh, like you guys got the good stuff. It is just like, I'm not any, like I don't do any of that. Like that's just not what it is. But like that's just like basic stereotypes that like I've gone through.
Jeffrey, what's an assumption or a conclusion that people in Canada draw about you based on your ethnicity?
I think they always think, where, just a simple questions. Where are you from? If I answer Toronto or somewhere, in Canada, they will just ask, actually, where are you from? That is the questions, it's like they always think that, so you are not necessarily Canadian. That is something that, the stereotyping, that is not nice, but at the same time, I think they need to understand Canada is a lot of things, it's not just one.
Yeah. Erna, how would you answer that question? What's a conclusion or an assumption people make about you?
I know I'm in a very small town. So Greater Sudbury is 150,000 people, but the area I live is 6,000. So as soon as I walk at the door, they think I'm from China, which is I'm not. And then, that's what exactly the same thing Jeffrey was talking about. They just assume you, and then, I don't know, I would say, but
How do you feel about that?
No, even I said I'm from Mongolia, that we still don't know what's Mongolia, and then they're still be like, oh, you're here for you must be from a very poor country, you're here for the health care. And it's like, first time I got here 2008, I did not like it. I was always questioned by why I'm here. I'm in Canada. I'm from a poor country that is, like that kind of questions. But I think there's no much, I say, different color people here. So I'm on my street, I'm the only one Asian. And then so that one is very hard, but some people understand, some people don't.
All right, now I'm going to ask you a question that I bet you've never thought of before. I'm very proud of myself. I think it's a very clever question. What is an assumption or a conclusion that people make about you based on the color of your skin? Anybody?
I think it's a lot more it's not really the color of your skin. It's also the way you present yourself and look. Like if I could be the nicest guy, the nicest looking guy, I could be Brad Pitt, but I could also, if I'm in dirty clothes and I look grubby and gross, I'm still going to be treated differently than anybody else. You know what I mean?
Okay. Anybody else want to take a step? You go ahead.
Yeah, I think this assumption is true to a certain extent, but I think there is an assumption that you're privileged, which white people are in a lot of ways. But there's still challenges for many different, even if you are white, like you still have different challenges. But I think that is an assumption for a lot of white people, that you're privileged, and not necessarily even disagreeing, but that is just the first kind of idea that came to mind.
I've had people in some of the other groups that I've done tell me that they don't always feel entirely welcome in this country, don't always feel entirely like they belong here. I have never felt that way for 1 second in my life. Have you?
Absolutely. Yes.
Why? Who laughed? Somebody laughed.
I giggled because I'm like, I would expect you to not have felt that way. So you making that statement to me was a little funny, because I wouldn't expect you to not feel welcome here. This is a country where white people are put on a pedestal and their lives are put in emphasis, and their existence seems to mean more than anyone else's. So I wouldn't expect you to not feel welcome. Whereas me, as a Black person, I have felt unwelcome. I look at my office. I work in an office of maybe 50 plus people. We have several meetings weekly. We have one group meeting, and I was the only Black man in my office. So when this whole Black Lives Matter situation with George Floyd came up, and they decided to make our meeting that week about the situation, everyone kind of looked at me, and I looked at them, and I'm like, you guys should be disgusted with yourself that I'm the only Black person and the only Black man on this staff. You guys have an issue with your office. This is a systemic issue. There is no reason for there not to be more of a presence of colored people amongst your staff. So don't look at me now that you guys are feeling uncomfortable in your white privilege. Don't expect me to make you not feel any more uncomfortable. Fix your shit.
Sure, Wayne? Have you ever felt uncomfortable or unwelcome?
Definitely. When I just came here and
How long have you lived here?
7 years.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and I applied for jobs and I did get called for the interview, but when I went there, the interview was like for 3 minutes. And I clearly remember this case where the interviewer folded my resume. Didn't really ask me anything. I was well qualified for the job. So that was clearly racism.
Okay. Anybody else? Give me an example of when you felt unwelcome or not really belonging in this country.
In the classroom growing up.
Me
I'm
too.
I'm learning all about the people who don't look like me. I'm learning about how Egypt's different from Africa. Learning about King Tut and all that. And I'm just like, yo, that's Africa. Why is it talk so separate? Like things like that. So growing up in Nova Scotia, we don't have many places that we can go to kind of get culture. My family, I can't trace it back. We've been here since forever. And my history's been watered down. So I've been trying to get that back. We have a Black Cultural Center, but I don't even think that has all the answers I'm looking for. It's things like that we suffer too. Our history's been lost over time. And how do we get that back?
I agree with that. During school growing up with being the only brown kid in the class or in the school, they always left me out of group stuff. Nobody wanted me on their team. And on top of that, it was always the Caucasian girls were the pretty girls. I always felt like I was the ugly girl because I was different.
You felt that way? Were you made to feel that way? Or did you feel that way?
They made me feel that way, like I was ugly and I was unwanted.
How familiar are you with the Indian residential schools that existed in Canada from the early 1900s through to the 1970s? Anybody ever heard about these residential schools? Hands up if you've heard about residential schools. Okay. Who feels they can tell me what happened in those schools? What's the story of those schools?
They're not allowed to go to
Go
to see their parents or family, and they're not allowed to speak their language.
Okay. Is that what everybody else has heard too, both of them?
I think they are trying to civilize, quote unquote, civilize the group, and then the church and the other organization, they as a partner in those, this government policy, and then but the church and other organizations carry out the doing,
And what's wrong with that, Jeff?
What's wrong with it?
What's wrong trying to civilize them?
Are they not civilized? So why? Okay, who defines civilized? So is it because you're not the same type? I'm just curious, right? So because they have their way of life, they don't depends on the system or the economy that how others see, and then that is the very colonial idea. I'm better than you. I'm here to make you better.
So first, Indigenous people in Canada have unusually high rates of poverty, unusually high rates of incarceration, unusually high rates of going missing, unusually high rates of children being taken away by social services and put into foster homes. I know it's a very complicated story, but why is that?
A lot of it, so I actually studied philosophy at university, and one of the things that French philosophers said was that pain and trauma are actually transcendent of generations. So when we go back to residential schools, that pain transcends the generation. So it affects not only the generation directly, but also generations after that. So I think that a lot of the stuff is just the result of what happened in the past. We're still dealing with that, and we're dealing with a government that continually promises, but never delivers any of the promises. Like in Ontario alone, we have over 100 reserves that don't have drinkable water right now. We're on boil water advisories and whatnot. So it's just this constant promising with no actual action.
Okay. Who else wants to take a stab at why conditions are the way they are?
So these people who were sent to residential schools, they are, I guess, seniors now, or even a bit younger. They have had children. Their children have also been damaged by residential schools, by the trauma that their parents have suffered. That's been passed on. Again, there was an apology, but not a lot of action for resources for healing and for the mental health issues that were caused by the trauma of residential schools. So it's this generation right now that needs the support.
What's an example of systemic racism as it affects our Indigenous people?
Just the fact that they're segregated, that they don't have access to the basic things, that, like you said, their children are removed from them. You know, back in the day, they were put in residential schools, and now it's just the evolution. So now they use CAS and other child protective services measures to take their children away from them. The fact that they have access to tobacco, alcohol, but if they live up north, fresh vegetables and fruit will cost them $20, $30. That's systemic. We're in Canada. We live in a country where the climate is, for the most part, cold most of the year. And I can still, even if strawberries are a little bit more expensive in January, they still aren't $20. And if you can't have the most basic necessities at an affordable rate, and if you're already working at a deficit, that's systemic. Even in the poorest parts of Montreal, or even in Toronto, you can go to a basic store and get fresh fruits and vegetables to feed your family so that you can stay healthy at a decent amount. There's at least a sale. They don't have those options.
Okay, so I've talked to a lot of people in my life about this subject who have said to me, okay, that's all real. That all happened. But we all have stuff in our past. We all had challenges. Some people came over from other countries with nothing. Other people faced different challenges in their life. And he said, it's up to you to overcome them. That the responsibility really rests with this generation of Indigenous people to just shrug it off and get going and lift themselves up by their bootstraps, like everybody else in Canada did. What's your reaction to that?
When I look at the way my mother grew up without her mother, because her mother never had a way to, she never had a way to deal with her trauma from being through the residential school system. It's difficult to see a way that she could succeed in life, that kind of an upbringing.
And how does that affect you?
It's really, there's so much more to life than just getting up and going to work and going hiking and climbing. And when I try to ask my mom about our history and our family, there's so much pain there that nobody wants to remember.
You don't know the stories? Do you know what happened to your grandmother in residential schools?
My grandmother kept everything a secret. She took it to her grave.
Why?
Pain.
Yeah, I would imagine it's pain.
Right. The residential schools pretty much ended 40, 50 years ago. There's some that went as late as, I think, 1990. But by and large, that system was dismantled by the 70s. How is it still affecting people?
We've only just recently in my house started talking about the possibility of my grandmother being and other relatives saying that, yeah, grandma was. But I don't think it's just my grandma's pain. I think that she was from a family of 12, and I don't think people from her generation were like us. They weren't open. They had so many skeletons and secrets in the closet that they didn't share any of that stuff with us. I mean, now we talk about all of the PTSD and we talk about things more than we did back then.
Something people often say in this country, diversity is our strength. Have you heard that expression before? Is that true? How can diversity be your strength?
Sure. I absolutely think that's kind of true in the sense of without diversity and without immigration and all that, I kind of question what Canada's values even are then. Because that's always what I've known it to be. And I have two roommates who came over from Pakistan and Dubai, and they are what makes Canada Canada for me. I think in ways, again, where we kind of struggle to include everybody who's diverse here, I do think that we are a very diverse country, and I think it is one of our strengths because we try hard at least to accept everybody here. We're working on it.
When an average Canadian wears a shirt that says something like that, diversity is our strength, we're proud of our diversity, what do you think they're being cynical, or do you think they're being genuine?
I think they're being genuine, but they're also being naive. And I can't remember who said it. It was one of the guys, but it's not your reality. So no one would expect you to know, just like I wouldn't expect you to know what it's like to be a woman and every month have to go through, your menstrual cycle. You'll never understand. You'll never fully appreciate, even if you have kids, even if you will never know, because that is not your reality. It's the same thing for someone who's not Black. You can even have kids who are Black and be a non-Black person. You will not know because that is not your reality. So if you wear that shirt, not to say you don't support, just like the hockey players taking a knee, would you be the person who would push the police officer off of George Floyd's neck when he's on the ground? Would you be the person who actually says something? Would you testify in court? Would you actually even record it? That's it. It's one thing to say, it's another thing to do. So it's what would you actually do in those situations? That's what makes the difference.
I think it's just to save face per se, unlike the US, we accept Blacks and everything. I think it's just surface level, but it goes no further. It's just on the surface.
Thank you for watching this program, and hopefully the full 3-part series. I found it eye-opening in so many respects because I was asking questions I had never asked before. I did not in any way appreciate the daily weight of being something other than white in Canada. I did not know that when I ask somebody non-white where they're from, as I do every driver whose taxi I get into, I'm not being friendly, I am emphasizing their otherness. I did not know that the pain and sadness of Indigenous people is just 1 millimeter below the face they put on. And I absolutely did not know that their own family histories were disappearing because it was too painful to talk about. I was not aware in any meaningful sense how Black and Brown Canadians feel their environment is not just biased against them, but hostile, even threatening to them. I learned some other things though as well. I learned that there's a deep wellspring of goodwill toward Indigenous people, more than I thought. People of other minorities, as well as Caucasians, recognize the depth of discrimination Indigenous people have and do face. Root causes are more fully understood than I thought. Everybody we talked to was aware of the residential schools and had no trouble understanding the legacy those schools are still leaving today. However, change requires a catalyst, and the political leadership of the Indigenous community is not breaking through. Indigenous people do not resent the attention Black Lives Matter gets. On the contrary, they see it as their best hope for fair treatment. Their hope is that a rising tide of fairness will lift all boats. Indigenous people attend BLM rallies and fight for it on Facebook. Black Canadians include Indigenous people among the people they're fighting for. I learned that symbols can really matter. Most people knew who Viola Desmond was, and they knew that because the Bank of Canada put her on the $10 bill. Now, people knew what her story was. It made all of our participants feel proud, and they felt it said something positive about Canada's willingness to confront its past. Fundamentally, what I heard in these groups is an aspiration. The idea of a society of true diversity and acceptance for all was seen as the essence of the country. You could hear it in their descriptions of Canada off the top. That is what people want it to be. But there's a strong divergence in starting points. Our white participants thought Canada was a good country, getting better. Our participants of color thought Canada was an okay country that needed a lot of change. Exposure really drives attitudes and behavior. George Floyd was a spark to help people understand how messed up the relationship between the police and Black people is. The video of Chief Adams' arrest graphically illustrated to our participants how differently from whites, Indigenous people are treated by police. And people who would never care about NFL football know Colin Kaepernick's name. Based on what I heard, there's a complacency among white Canadians about the amount of discrimination embedded in our society, including the police. But when people are confronted with the reality of discrimination, they recoil from the injustice of it. It's just not Canadian. Again, thank you for watching. I would like to thank our presenting sponsor, Telus, for their kind contribution to this project. Most of all, I would like to thank the 24 people from all parts of Canada and all walks of life for participating so candidly and thoughtfully.